So in this podcast, in this vlog, I wanted to follow up on an excellent point in the comments here on my YouTube channel where we were exploring this idea. We were exploring this idea in Warhammer 40,000 called deployment lockdown, where essentially you're taking parts of your army that have the ability to move very, very fast or suddenly appear on the table and literally bomb your opponent's deployment zone. So this way, over the next couple of game turns, they have to spend their dice and model resources removing those models, removing those units. And as a result, they're not moving out. Their units are not moving out and radiating into the midfield and across the gaming table for mission objectives, and you're starving them of time. Because in 40K, it's a Yugo system with a finite number of turns in there. And I know I'm generalizing a little bit, but I wanted to lay that foundation. And the idea in the comments, and it was an excellent piece, and this is coming from someone that enjoys playing a variety of wargaming systems, the idea that a Yugo system is very limited, and it opens up, I won't say shenanigans like this, but it opens up tactics that shouldn't exist elsewhere. And in Warhammer 40,000 9th edition, which at some point will be materializing, when that is, a year from now, 2 years from now, at some point it will, do you guys think, will or would Games Workshop have the ability to break free and give us a more dynamic gaming system? I mean, certainly if you would have said a number of years ago that they're going to implode Warhammer Fantasy, totally destroy it, and simplify and reinvent things on it, and I think it was a good step with Age of Sigmar in terms of put the models and the new lore aside for a second, absolutely fantastic, but as a chance to break free and say these massive Warhammer Fantasy battles, make them more dynamic, make them play much faster, not skirmish, not kill team-esque size, but a good-sized wargaming system on there. Is 40K or could 40K make a break on there? My thoughts on it. Warhammer 40,000 is very much a product of the 80s. It's based on a D6 based system. Now, we have command points. We have other limited ways of modifying certain things in the game. We have what I call exploding dice, or you have D3 type dice to add on. So they're pushing things out from a D6 based system, but it is still essentially based on a D6 system. That is the DNA of the game underneath and how it operates. This is further chained where, for the most part, I move my stuff, I shoot my stuff, I assault my stuff, I cast my powers on my stuff. You might have a very limited interrupt, but essentially I'm going to move everything and do everything, and you hang out, and then it's your turn. This system is very simplistic, and it allows, when you're dealing with a large number of models on the table, which Warhammer 40,000, regular 40K, whatever was regular for 40K these days, it accommodates that. And this video is also leading us into certain tactics if you are looking to exploit what I call stress points. So we'll kind of divert for another second here because it brings up an excellent point. Every gaming system is a simulation of a narrative, whether it's Battletech, Chain of Command, Historicals, Wings of Glory, Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar. And by putting down your models and signing on to play, you are saying this simulation is going to create the rules of engagement. It tries to do what the narrative is, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi or historical. There are points in the rules, because this is not a free-form RPG, open sandbox, do whatever the heck you want on there. As the rules move along, at certain points, they get a little crunchy. They kind of grind to a halt on there. There are exploits. This is not rules lawyering. This is not trying to beat one over on your opponent. It's an acknowledgement that every system has its flaw, some more than others, and utilizing that flaw. So one of the flaws, I call these stress points in gaming. This is what in X-Wing 1.0 allowed me to dominate locally because it's a very fast and furiously played game, but the stress points were just glaring on there. And if you built your lists to exploit those, it was something that a lot of other players were not necessarily aware of. And unfortunately, 2.0 is looking to shape up even worse than that. So identifying the stress points there and exploiting them, if you're going to play competitive, you do what you have to do. So one of the stress points with 40K, since it's a Yugo system, first turn, if I optimize my army, I mean, a lot of us, we try to build our army to accomplish mission objectives, a little bit of everything, get the units down on the table we want to play, be able to remove models from our opponent because that helps win mission objectives and prevents you from winning mission objectives. But there is something to be said about developing your army to just wipe the opponent off the table. What's your plan? My plan is basically to win by rolling lots of dice on there. Yugo means first turn. First turn is massive. We see this with the Alpha Strike. We've seen it across all aspects of shooting. Also, a stress point of being a D6-based system means, in theory, anything can wound everything. In the previous edition of 40K, where we had armor values, only certain weapons could hurt an armor value, you saw this shift, this two-tiered shift between infantry, monsters, creatures, and vehicles. It was an attempt to pull vehicles in a separate class out of a D6-based system that slowed things down. You had certain units that couldn't even touch a vehicle on there, so Games Workshop now just throws on more wounds. I won't say 40K is a dying system, but the exploits are glaring on it to be exploited. So Fritz, what are some of the other options? I'm not saying we're going to get Sigmarized, but we could still keep the matrix of movement, wounds, and toughness and weapons profiles. What if we just kind of mixed up activation? What if we looked at some different ideas on there? I'm going to pull in two gaming systems that I also really, really enjoy and kind of move from there. There's this idea in Battletech. It is a non-finite game turn system, which means you have the mission parameters and you play them out either until one side has pulled off the table or kind of bowed out, surrendered, whatever, or those mission objectives have been completed on there. So I can begin to march my mechs up the table and it's turn one, and then my opponent mounts a really good defense or I get a little bit bogged down, then I pull back out and look for a new way to approach. Or I can make this big show of going up the left side of the table, and it's a real fake because I can then swing around back to the center of the table. There are no finite game turns. This opens up a lot of possibilities in that tactically you can regroup. You can make decisions. When you start taking losses, and they're not critical, hopefully, at that point, you could reorganize. At 40K, when you commit, you're burning game turns. When you commit, you've committed on there. The challenge with Battletech is you're dealing with a battle value to buy mechs and vehicles and infantry. Maybe you're playing with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces, whether they're mechs or tanks, individuals on the table. Trying to play 40K where there's no amount of game turns, that can lead to a very, very, very long game on there. And what 40K does do right and well, Age of Sigmar does this better, explosive action. You commit, you make your decisions, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't work out, we have the winner of a game on there. Move to the next or play to the next on there. The other interesting piece with Battletech, and then we're going to look at Chain of Command for fuels of thought, and I'm going to turn it over to the comments for you guys, kind of open sandbox 40K. Battletech is, with movement, it's an initiative system. So we dice off at the beginning to see who wins initiative, and the player that loses initiative has to move one model, one unit first. That gives the other player the advantage of now being able to counteract their movement. And we go back and forth moving pieces on the table. If I have more units, then I will move them in groups. There's a little bit of a division on there, so maybe instead of moving one piece, I move 3. But we take turns activating and moving back and forth. That makes things extremely tactical because it's literally rewards you for good initiative if you win that, but it's back and forth, counter, and push and see where you can go and see how your opponent and you move. Shooting phase in Battletech happens both at the same time. So if you take losses on there, those losses are removed, but the unit still has the starting strength. So my mech, if I have weapons in my arms, I've got lasers and stuff like that and missiles. If they get blown off, in that shooting phase, they're blown off and they're damaged, but it's happening at the same time, so I get my shots off before damage is applied. And again, I'm simplifying things a little bit here, but from that perspective, it works really, really well. It's real time, simulates real time, and this is a rule set from the 80s with less updates than Games Workshop. So certainly the tech is there. So let's look at Chain of Command. And both Chain of Command and Battletech, they're up on my archive, on my YouTube channel here if you kind of want to check out more. I never considered myself a hysterical wargamer because I'm so busy with sci-fi and 40K and Battletech. And I played some Romans, DBA, I played a little bit of DBM, Wings of Glory, World War I, I guess that would count as historicals. But being pulled into the rule set of Chain of Command for World War II, the narrative aside, the rules are really, really good with what they do. And the two things that I really enjoy from it is the idea of hidden movement and jump-off points and how the phase activates. And I just want to kind of highlight that for a second. When the game starts, you've got your gaming table, and you put out these markers on the table. And there's some rules with how they maneuver and how you put them out and when they become locked. We'll put that aside. Those markers represent the possibility of units being there. So imagine if there's two buildings on my side of the table, and I put a marker behind each building. That means you have intelligence that could be something potentially in that building. You don't know what, you don't know where until it's revealed, until I deploy it on there. Now 40K has had some interesting alternatives to deployment in the past and in the current. I think a great example was back in the old Tyranid Codex, because I have fond memories of it. Y-Stealers being able to bust out. Gene Stealer cults have got some things on there. But there's very, very little hidden information in 40K. Is that a good or bad thing? I think neither, but it's not a very dynamic game. So imagine now if you had your 40K units and you bought them on points or battle value or power level or list value, whatever it's going to be, and you kept those hidden. You kept those revealed off the table. You have these marker points which when you activate a unit and you want to deploy it, it activates within 6 inches of one of these jump-off points on there. That means, like World War II Chain of Command, if I bring one of my Panzer's tanks on the table and I'm zooming down that road, I got to be aware of where those potential jump-off points are, because an anti-tank gun might be hidden in there. The idea is units are hidden until they are revealed. That is very powerful. That is very interesting. And tactically, it makes sense. Camouflage, dug in, hiding, whatever. Chain of Command, the way that the game works is not everything activates at once. You take a bunch of dice, D6. It is a D6-based system on there. And it's similar to 40K in that when there comes time for action, you have to roll to hit. Then you have to roll to cause wounds or shock, which kind of adds up and makes morale tests. And then when you kill, you possibly have to test or see what's hit. So there are some similarities, but it's extremely streamlined and updated. When it's your turn, depending on how many command dice that you have, usually it's 5 Chain of Command dice, you take them, you roll them out. That's your command structure in that moment for that turn. And an example would be if you roll a 1, that means, and I'm mapping this to Chain of Command terms to 40K terms. If you roll a 1, you could activate a heavy support choice. So, okay, I've got a Land Raider. Let's say it's heavy support. I would take that die, D6-1, and say, okay, I'm activating this Land Raider. Now it can move, it can shoot, it can deploy, it can do what it has to do on the table. If I get a 2 or 3, it represents a unit. If I get a 6, that's nothing. But if you get a number of 6s, the turn ends. If I get a 5, I get a command point. And when I generate 6, I get a Chain of Command die. So I'm generating this extra separate pool of dice based on the command structure. And for every chain of command die that I have, I can do a lot of special things. I can interrupt, which means I can say if you're moving, so let's say you're moving your tank down that hill, over that hill and down the road, it's your turn. You're activating, you're moving. If I have a chain of command die that I built up, that I've saved up, I can say interrupt, deploy a quick unit and ambush you. Or I can take a shot with a unit on the table. Or I can move a jump off point. Or I can activate other special aspects of the game or my army. It allows, it speeds things up for the most part with a Yugo, Igo structure like in 40K, but we also see a lot of uniqueness like in Battletech where I'm not just sitting there as you're beating on me with your army. I'm actively spending resources, interrupts, and commands, and it's a finite pool. Even though I'm generating potentially a little bit every turn, it's a finite pool. Tactically, I have to know when to spend it or when to not. I really could see command points in 40K pushing forward and really, really morphing into that as opposed to a way to make up for shortcomings of your army and stuff that you forget halfway through the game, or at least I do, on there. Your thoughts? I would personally like to see 40K move to something more dynamic, more interactive. I think in terms of the wargaming community and how things have evolved, I mean, custom dice does this. I won't say we need custom dice, but I think it's time for that, to update the tech. And I think that would really bring 40K in line with a lot of other really great games that are out there. But at the same time, what 40K does really well, because Games Workshop wants you to buy more and more and more models, you throw down a lot of models for an average size game. I mean, Battletech is an average game. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mechs, a couple of tanks, and some infantry counters on there, and that would be considered a big game. Most games are 4 or 5 mechs or 4 or 5 units. Chain of Command, an average size game would be 2 small groups, maybe a senior officer and a tank or 2 on there, and maybe a special weapons team, and you can break off and do different things. But dynamic games tend to necessitate being smaller in size. If you have all the units like we have in 40K, and I'm not only talking about the diversity of units, but just what I'm throwing down my biggest army, okay, my biggest army is my Tyranids. If I'm throwing down all those Tyranids on the table, to have each one move back and forth and interrupts and custom activations, the game just absolutely won't play. On a side note, and we'll cover this at another time because this was only supposed to be a 5 or 6 minute podcast, then I'm going to switch it over to you. Blackstone Fortress. I know it's the evolution of the tech of Silver Tower, but Blackstone Fortress, yes, I would love to see those rules ported 1-to-1 to 40K. I would love to see 40K play like Blackstone Fortress on there. It's streamlined. You've got some war gear. You've got some cards. You've got some customizations. A lot of tactical options. You've got the Destiny pool. You got a lot of different things where it plays fast. It plays furious. It's not you go, I go. There are potential interrupt options, even though you're playing against an AI. Although you can have someone control the units and forces in the fortress itself. A game from last week, I did just that, and it was very satisfying to play those Trader Guard on there. So that's another possibility, something that I wouldn't mind seeing. Your thoughts, 40K, I won't say next edition, because I don't think we're there quite yet, but if you had to reinvent or re-examine the turn structure, how would you do that?